The gates slam shut before the sun is down, and the sound carries farther than any trumpet. From this moment, if the wells inside fail, if the grain runs short, if the wall opens even once, the city starts killing you before the enemy does. This is how an ancient siege begins when you are not a commander, not a hero, not a name in a chronicle, but one more adult trapped behind stone with everyone else. The outer farms are already lost. Animals still in the streets are being dragged inward or slaughtered fast. Carts jam the approaches to the gates. People who lived beyond the walls arrive too late and stay outside, shouting, bargaining, beating on timber plated with bronze or iron. Once the bars drop into place, the choice is finished. Plataea knew that in 429 BCE when the Peloponnesians closed in. Jerusalem knew it in 70 CE when Titus tightened the Roman ring. Syracuse knew it when Athenian camps and fleets turned pressure into confinement. The pattern repeats because the first law of siege survival is simple. Inside becomes smaller every hour. At first, the walls still look like protection. Towers rise over the roads. High ground gives watchers a view of smoke from the suburbs and vineyards already being stripped. Defenders hurry to stack stones, sand, timber, javelins, and jars of water on rooflines and parapets. Men fit spare bowstrings. Women and children haul baskets, fuel, and broken masonry. Old doors are ripped from hinges for bracing weak points or feeding ovens before fuel grows scarce. A city under threat eats and burns what it can no longer spare. Stay with the story, because the first danger is not the ram. It is the crowd. Streets narrow when refugees pour in from unwalled districts, bringing animals, tools, bedding, and rumors. One report says the attackers are too few to surround the place. Another says cavalry has already cut the north road. One account claims a relief force is marching. Another says the harbor mouth is blocked. In every documented siege, rumor travels faster than grain. Thucydides, Josephus, Polybius, Appian, and later chroniclers disagree on details, but not on this. Once the gates close, confusion becomes a physical force. It clogs movement, hides theft, ruins ration plans, and sends people toward the same well at the same hour. So your first hours are practical. Find water. Not tomorrow. Now. Does the city depend on cisterns cut into rock, like many Levantine towns, on springs tunneled inward like Jerusalem's water systems, or on wells inside a lower quarter that can be reached from several streets? If water lies near an exposed wall or gate, that district becomes dangerous at once. If the city has a harbor, as Syracuse and Alexandria did, ask whether the harbor is still open. A harbor can keep a city alive or become a killing zone when enemy ships close it. Then find food stores, not market stalls. Market grain disappears first because panic buying empties visible stock. Real survival depends on granaries, temple stores, civic reserves, private hoards, dried legumes, oil jars, salted fish, and whatever livestock made it in before the last gate shut. Archaeology from Mediterranean sites repeatedly shows storage pit holes sunk into floors, bins lined against damp, and emergency use of every enclosed courtyard. In a siege, private houses turn into warehouses, kitchens, infirmaries, workshops, and sleeping pens all at once. Now listen to the wall. You can hear the city changing. Hammer blows on gate beams. Orders barked from towers. Mules screaming as loads are forced uphill. The scrape of stone dragged into place. The first distant cheers from enemy troops choosing campground. If the attackers are experienced, they do not rush blindly. They mark the weak sectors, the low saddles in the terrain, the approaches covered by dead ground, the stretch where a ram can be brought near, the quarter where a spring might be cut. At Jerusalem, the Romans built methodically. At Carthage in the final war, every sector of access mattered. At Plataea, the attackers studied where wall and weather might do their work for them. Your survival question is already clear. Not, can the city win? Because many cities do not. Not, will help come? Because sometimes it does not. The real question is whether you can last through the sequence that breaks most people first. Thirst, crowding, smoke, exhaustion, hunger, infection, and the one night when the wall suddenly sounds different. Stay close to a defensible quarter, keep away from gates unless assigned there, and watch where the water lines form. Before dawn, the enemy camps will have fires. By the second day, The roads will begin to disappear. A wall can save you for months or fail you in an afternoon. Height matters, but not by itself. What matters is whether the wall sits on rock or loose fill, whether towers overlap their fields of fire, whether the ditch in front still has depth, whether the gate can be reinforced from inside, and whether the city behind the stone can actually feed the number of people now packed into it. Ancient cities were rarely built with one clean line of defense. Many had layers, an outer circuit around lower neighborhoods, an acropolis or inner citadel on high ground, maybe a fortified harbor quarter, maybe a palace precinct, maybe old stretches of wall patched by later rulers with different masonry. That matters because the city you are trapped in is not one thing. It is a set of survival zones. The high city usually holds the last reserve of safety, the best view, and often the best chance of controlling food and water. The lower city usually holds more people, more workshops, more animals, and more danger if the enemy reaches the streets. Jerusalem had upper and lower districts divided by ravines and strengthened sectors. Syracuse stretched across plateaus, walls, and harbor edges in ways that offered both strength and vulnerability. Terrain decides almost as much as masonry. A city on a steep hill forces the attacker to work uphill under missiles, but hill cities can suffer from poor internal water access if their springs lie low. A river helps only if it flows through reachable ground and cannot be diverted or dominated by enemy archers. A harbor is a blessing until hostile fleets or blockades cut it. Marshes, cliffs, ravines, and rocky escarpments reduce the number of approaches, yet they also funnel every defender toward a few critical sectors. Plataea and many Levantine strongholds used terrain well. Other places paid for every low saddle, dry moat, or neglected spur. Then comes water, the point on which strong walls can become useless. Ask first whether the city has perennial springs inside the line of defense. If yes, the place can resist longer. If no, survival depends on wells, cisterns, and stored rainwater. In the Near East, underground reservoirs and plastered cisterns could support large populations, but only if they had been filled before the siege and guarded from waste. Springs captured through tunnels or protected shafts, like the famous systems associated with Jerusalem, could keep water flowing even while the enemy stood outside. But if a spring rose beyond the wall, or if the path to it was exposed, every bucket became a target. Attackers knew this. Ancient military writers and narrative historians keep returning to the same points. Cut water, burn suburbs, block foraging, wait. Food is the second pillar, and it is never distributed evenly. Grain stores mean wheat or barley if the city prepared well, but grain alone does not keep people functioning under heavy labor. You need pulses, oil, salt, dried fruit where climate allows, maybe wine safer than bad water, and fuel to cook any of it. Livestock is useful but tricky. Animals consume fodder fast and foul crowded streets. In a long siege, they are slaughtered early, and after that the city shifts toward coarse bread, thin porridge, and whatever can be stretched. Josephus describes the descent at Jerusalem with grim detail. Polybius and Appian show again and again that cities do not starve in a single step. They fall through layers of worsening diet. Population pressure wrecks every defense plan. A wall designed to protect 20,000 cannot comfortably hold 30 or 40,000 once farmers, villagers, traders, laborers, and kin from the countryside are forced inside. Water lines grow. Latrines overflow. Roofs and courtyards fill with sleepers. Valuable open ground disappears under makeshift shelters. At that point, the city becomes harder to move through just when speed matters most. So what makes your city vulnerable? A spring outside the walls. Too many mouths. A harbor not fully secure. A suburb left standing close enough to shelter attackers. A gate on flat ground. Old masonry with fresh cracks. Sources from many sieges show the same truth. Once pressure begins, weakness is rarely mysterious. It sits in the map, the stores, and the number of people now trapped inside. By the end of the first full day, the strong sectors look stronger and the weak ones draw every eye. The enemy will soon see the same pattern and act on it fast. Now exactly. By the second dawn, the city already smells different. Fresh bread is rarer, smoke hangs lower in the lanes, and every bucket lowered into a cistern is watched by someone who did not sleep. The first days are when a siege still looks survivable and quietly becomes dangerous. Now the work begins that never makes the painted triumphs. Roofs are cleared so defenders can move across them. Loose tiles are stacked where they can be dropped or broken for sharp fragments. Water jars are carried upward to towers because fires will come sooner or later. Wood is sorted, some for cooking, some for repairs, some for barricades behind gates. In cities with flat roofs and narrow alleys, rooftop movement becomes a second street system. In places like Jerusalem or many eastern towns, that can save time, but it also spreads sparks and panic if fire takes hold. Crowd control arrives fast. Wells cannot be left open to chaos. A line has to form, guarded if necessary, because one fight at a well can wound more people than an arrow volley. Temples, courtyards, and market spaces become ration points, sleeping grounds, or holding areas for new arrivals. Animals are penned where possible, but the city soon runs out of clean places to keep them. Their dung adds to the filth, their noise carries at night, and their value changes by the hour. A donkey that could haul stones yesterday may be meat next week. Watching the horizon is now part of survival. You want eyes on roads, ridges, harbor mouths, and dust plumes. One distant column of smoke could mean orchards destroyed, a relief force turned back, or suburbs being stripped for enemy timber. At Plataea, the defenders watched enemy works rise around them. At Syracuse, the contest over walls and counterwalls turned open ground into a map of constant danger. At Jerusalem, every Roman advance reshaped what could be seen and where movement was still possible. If your city has signal towers or agreed fire codes with allies, those matter now. If not, you rely on runners, and runners are already at risk. Rationing starts earlier than people expect. The sensible cities do it immediately. The foolish ones delay because leaders fear unrest. Delay is deadly. Once hoarding begins, visible markets empty and private stock vanishes behind locked doors. Then the poor start losing first. Ancient sources are blunt on this point. Hunger in a siege is not fair. Those with stores, hidden jars, or access to guarded districts last longer. Those who came in from the countryside with little more than tools and blankets begin trading away valuables for handfuls of grain. The first days also decide whether the walls stay useful. You inspect parapets for cracks. You strengthen gates with earth, rubble, and timber from within. You move extra stones to threatened sectors. If artillery is expected, you thicken vulnerable platforms. By the Hellenistic and Roman periods, engines matter. Catapults, bolt shooters, stone throwers, and the labor needed to feed them. Even earlier, ladders, fire, and rams can do enough damage if a wall face is neglected. Noise becomes intelligence. Hammering beyond the walls may mean camp stakes and palisades. A steady thud in one sector may mean siege engines being assembled out of timber cut from your own fields. Axes in the distance can mean orchards falling. If the enemy is organized, cavalry or light troops will already be riding the roads to intercept messengers. Sources disagree on exact timings in many sieges, but nearly all agree on the same early pattern. The side outside moves to isolate, and the side inside scrambles to measure how complete that isolation really is. Thucydides notices the mechanics at Plataea, Josephus the pressure inside Jerusalem, and archaeology fills in the rest with burnt layers, reused masonry, and dense clusters of sling bullets where defenders fought to hold one short stretch of wall. So in the first days, survival means routine under pressure. Know where the water comes from. Know where food is issued. Know which towers are threatened. Keep a path clear between your sleeping place and the safest inner district. Stay off exposed roofs when missiles start. Keep cloth, sand, and water near any point fire might spread. A city does not collapse all at once. It begins by mismanaging small necessities. By the time the horizon glows with the enemy's regular campfires, the easy movement in and out is over. What remains outside will probably stay outside. Now, soon. The worst sight in the first week is not the army itself. It is the camps becoming permanent. Once you see straight rows of tents, fenced animal lines, timber stacks, dug latrines, guarded roads, and smoke rising from fixed kitchens, you know the enemy did not come to frighten the city. It came to stay until the city breaks. Attackers settle in with brutal logic. High ground first, if they can take it. Water sources next. Roads after that. A professional army does not need to storm the wall on day one if it can close every route by which the city might still breathe. At Plataea, the Peloponnesians built lines and works. At Syracuse, Athenians and Syracusans fought over walls that were really arguments about movement, supply, and enclosure. At Jerusalem, Titus tightened the ring until flight became almost impossible. Circumvallation, contravallation, outposts, patrol routes, and observation points all serve the same end. Cut the city off from information, food, fuel, and hope. Roads vanish in stages. First the broad roads are watched, then the side tracks, then the goat paths, gullies, and vineyard lanes. A messenger may still slip through once, perhaps twice, especially by night or bad weather, but each attempt grows harder. Intercepted runners do more damage than lost letters ever could because everyone inside understands what their failure means. No word out, no word in. Relief, if it exists, has to guess your condition. You, meanwhile, begin guessing blind. If the city has a harbor, the sea becomes another wall. This was decisive at Syracuse, where naval struggle determined whether supplies and men could move freely. In Alexandria and other great port cities, control of quays, causeways, and entrances could divide districts and choke whole quarters. A blockade at sea is cruel in a different way from a blockade on land. It can tease the city with visible water and unreachable ships. People on the walls can sometimes see masts and still starve. Now the suburbs are stripped. Everything outside bowshot that can shelter attackers, conceal sorties, or provide the defenders with cover is at risk. Houses burn. Orchards fall. Timber, doors, beams, fences, carts, and even vines are taken for siege works, fuel, ladders, mantlets, and camp structures. The enemy is not only removing resources from you, it is turning your landscape into weapons against you. Smoke from your own outskirts becomes part of the daily horizon. Inside the city, that changes behavior fast. People stop speaking of a short emergency and begin counting stores. Bakers reduce portions. Water carriers work longer. Men posted on the walls stay longer at the same sectors because rotating them safely takes more coordination than before. Sleep breaks into fragments. Night is no longer dark. Enemy fires outline the ring. Dogs bark at patrols outside the wall. Trumpets, shouted watchwords, and the clatter of tools carry farther after midnight than they seem possible to carry. A city under siege learns its enemies' sounds by repetition. The attackers also probe without committing. Small groups move toward different sectors to test response time. Archers or slingers edge close enough to draw shots and reveal where defenders are concentrated. Engineers inspect ground conditions for towers, rams, mines, or fill. If there is a ditch, they measure how to fill it. If a wall foot is exposed, they look for a place to undermine. If part of the circuit has been rebuilt in haste or from poorer material, they will find it. Archaeology at besieged sites often shows concentrated damage at exactly such points, where old repairs met new strain. Hope of quick relief begins to fade not because nobody wants it, but because the evidence runs against it. No Allied force appears on the ridges. No friendly sails break the blockade. No sudden attack forces the besiegers to turn around. Ancient authors sometimes exaggerate numbers or heroics, but the physical signals are harder to fake. More camps, more timber, more patrols, more days without free movement. That is what tells you the siege is deepening. This is when secret routes matter. Some cities had postern gates hidden in angles of the wall, stairways cut through rock, drains large enough for one desperate body, or paths dropping into ravines where a runner might vanish. But once the enemy settles in, these routes grow dangerous. Patrols learn the ground. Locals are questioned. Captives can betray what they know. One account claims this path remained open. Another says it was discovered and sealed with spears and watchfires. Sources often disagree on details, but they agree on the trend. Every day the circle closes tighter. By now you understand the siege is no longer an event. It is a system pressing inward from every side. When the first intercepted messenger is displayed beneath the walls, or the first secret path fails to reopen by dawn, the city feels smaller again. You notice the siege becoming normal when the bread changes. The loaves get smaller, darker, and heavier with husk and filler, and nobody wastes time complaining because everyone can count the days in the bins. What was emergency on the first evening is now routine, and routine under siege is hard labor with less sleep and worse food. Daily life narrows to tasks that keep the city standing. Water first, then fuel, then wall duty, hauling, repairs, and carrying messages between sectors that can no longer trust shouted orders to travel cleanly through crowded streets. If you are able-bodied, somebody finds work for you. Stone up to the wall, earth to reinforce a gate, timber to brace a tower platform, buckets to a burned roof. Wounded men away from the parapet. Children too young for fighting still run errands, gather fragments, fetch rags, and queue for water. The old do what they can indoors until the city has no true indoors left. Food changes faster than morale. Fresh vegetables vanish early unless the city enclosed gardens, and even then they go first to guarded households, sanctuaries, or garrisons. Grain is ground more roughly because time and fuel are short. Pulses become more important. Meat appears in short bursts when animals are slaughtered, then disappears. Salted fish or preserved goods last only where stocks were good before the gates shut. Wine is watered harder. Oil is measured more carefully because it feeds lamps as well as bodies. Josephus, Appian, and later siege accounts all show the same grim curve. Variety collapses first, then quantity, then regularity. Prices rise even when official rationing exists. Hidden trade moves at night or behind closed doors. A jar of oil, a handful of clean grain, a strip of leather fit for sandal repair, a sound cloak, a knife that still holds an edge. Everything useful begins to change hands faster and at worse terms. The people with reserves survive longer. The people who arrived late, or poor, or already hungry, start cutting portions first. You do not need a philosophical treatise to see the social divide of a siege. It appears at the well, the oven, and the burial ground. Work increases because the enemy keeps forcing it higher. A damaged parapet must be rebuilt before dark. A gate shaken by a ram needs extra backing with rubble and earth. Stones have to be sorted by size for dropping or throwing. Buckets are stationed at roof corners. Wet hides, if available, are hung where fire is expected. Anyone who has read ancient military treatises notices that they are full of such practical measures because a city survives on repairs more than on speeches. A breach prevented at midnight matters more than a promise shouted at noon. Sleep worsens in layers. First the watches lengthen. Then sudden alarms break what rest remains. Then enemy engines or sappers begin work at times chosen to wear the defenders down. In some sieges, attackers deliberately used noise to harass the wall. Hammering, shouted insults, trumpet calls, shield beating, movement of engines by night. In others, the quiet was worse because it suggested mining or hidden preparations. Either way, exhaustion becomes part of the enemy's method. Danger also becomes routine, which is a different problem. Once missiles have fallen for several days, people take risks they would have avoided at first. They linger in exposed lanes. They stand too high on parapets. They hurry along familiar routes at regular hours where archers have already ranged the distance. Ancient sling bullets found at siege sites remind you how lethal ordinary projectiles were. Lead glands, stones from torsion engines, arrows, bolts, and debris dropped from above do not need heroic scenes. They need one clear line of flight. Meanwhile, the city still has to function enough to keep itself from rotting. Grain must be milled somewhere. Water jars must be cleaned. Waste must go somewhere. Animals must be slaughtered or moved. Fires must be watched. Streets blocked by rubble or abandoned carts have to be cleared because defenders may need to run through them at night. In cities with narrow lanes and stepped districts, a single collapsed wall can choke movement for an entire neighborhood. Archaeology from destroyed quarters often shows this ugly sequence. Burn layer, collapsed masonry, smashed storage jars, then hurried reuse of space by people trying to keep living inside the damage. The siege stops feeling like a single threat and becomes hundreds of small demands, all urgent, all physical. Fetch, carry, watch, patch, hew, boil, bury, sleep in scraps, wake to noise, count jars, count wounds, count who still shows up for the next shift. That is how daily life hardens inside a trapped city. Then one morning the routine breaks. Not because anyone is ready, but because the attackers finally push one method far enough to make the wall answer back. The first real shock is the moment the wall stops feeling solid. You hear it before you see it. A deep repeated impact under the ordinary noise of shouting and missiles, or the hiss and crash of stones from engines landing where families slept the night before. After that, the siege is no longer preparation. It is contact. Ancient cities could absorb harassment for days, even weeks. What changes the mood inside is a concentrated assault or a single method brought close enough to matter. The options are old and ugly. Ladders under missile cover, a ram against a gate, mining beneath a tower, artillery pounding a weak face, fire against timbered defenses, or betrayal opening access from within. Sometimes several come together. At Plataea, siege works and engineering mattered as much as open fighting. At Syracuse, counter walls and assaults turned specific sectors into death traps. At Jerusalem, Roman engines, ramps, and relentless labor pushed pressure higher with each phase. At Carthage in 146 BCE, street fighting followed breaches and forced retreat inward by district. A ram is terrifying because everyone understands it. The beam swings, the head strikes, and even before visible damage appears, the gate begins to speak through the wood and metal. Defenders answer with chains, hooks, dropped stones, fire, side sorties, or packed earth and rubble piled behind the leaves. Ancient military writers describe these measures with dry precision because they were standard survival tools. If a gate can be backed from inside with enough mass, the ram may splinter timber without opening a path. If not, every hit shortens the city's time. Mining is worse because it is half invisible. You may notice vibration in the soles of your feet, hear muffled scraping beneath a tower base, or see dust sifting down from masonry joints. Experienced defenders count to mind when they could, digging toward the sound underground and fighting in darkness, smoke, or sudden cave-ins. Several ancient narratives mention this terrible form of combat because it stripped away spectacle and left only labor, heat, and suffocation. A tower that stands all day can slump by dawn if its footing has been burned or hollowed out below. Artillery changes space inside the city. Once stone throwers and bolt shooters find the range, courtyards, streets near the wall, and upper stories become hazardous. Hellenistic and Roman siegecraft made increasing use of engines capable of smashing parapets, killing crews, or keeping defenders back while sappers worked. Archaeological finds of heavy stone shot at siege sites are the hard proof behind what ancient historians describe. When one of those stones hits a roof or wall, it does not merely kill. It rearranges where people can move and sleep. Fire travels faster than orders. If the attackers get flame into dry timber, roofing, stored fuel, or packed structures, the city suddenly fights on two fronts. Defenders form bucket chains, tear down burning sections, throw dirt and wet cloth, and try to keep panic from opening lanes into stampedes. In dense quarters, especially where houses share walls or roofs sit close, a single fire can ruin a district's usefulness even if the attackers never cross the wall. Many ancient cities were mixtures of stone, mud brick, timber beams, reed, plaster, and stored goods. Enough flame in the right wind could do what ladders could not. Betrayal is the shock nobody can predict well. A postern gate left unsecured. A faction opening a way. A sentry bribed, coerced, or replaced. Sources often exaggerate treachery because defeated cities attract stories of blame, so caution matters. Still, the record is clear that internal division could magnify external attack. Once trust inside the wall is questioned, guarding the city becomes harder in every sector. What changes most in this first major shock is the city's sense of sequence. Until now, people still imagine time in days. After a strong assault, time shrinks to sectors and hours. Which tower took damage? Which gate held? Which street is blocked? Who has spare water near the burned quarter? Whether the wounded can still be moved through the lane behind the wall. The map inside your head becomes tighter and more practical. Ancient authors keep returning to these moments because they expose the real contest. Not valor in the abstract, but labor under impact. Thucydides notes engineering and countermeasures. Josephus gives the Roman method and the city's growing strain. Polybius and Appian track how one breach or one fired quarter can shift an entire siege. The evidence from stone shot, collapsed towers, burned layers, and hasty repairs says the same. If you survive the first big assault, you do not return to the old routine. From then on, Everyone knows the wall can answer the enemy with dust, flame, and openings where no opening existed the day before. A siege turns personal the first time a wound stays in your room overnight. Not on the wall, not in a shouted report, but on the floor where you sleep, wrapped in cloth that was clean yesterday and stiff by morning. After that, survival stops being measured only in walls and stores. It is measured in infection, waste, fever, and whether the city can still carry its dead. Injury inside a besieged city does not look like a neat list of battle casualties. It is cuts from shattered masonry, punctures from arrows, crushed limbs from falling stone, burns from roof fires, and the constant stream of smaller wounds from hauling, digging, and splintered timber. Ancient medicine could clean, bandage, stitch, cauterize, set fractures, and sometimes save lives impressively well for the period, but siege conditions ruin treatment. Water may be dirty, cloth may be reused, instruments may be limited, space is crowded, rest is scarce. A man with a wound that might heal in open country can die in a packed room by the wall. Sanitation becomes a survival problem long before famine reaches its worst point. Too many people are now using too few latrines, pits, drains, and corners of open ground. If the siege is long, some normal systems fail because labor, water, and safe access all shrink at once. Waste collects near dwellings. Flies multiply. Runoff contaminates paths and possibly cistern approaches. In hot weather, the stench thickens. In rain, it spreads. Ancient writers do not always dwell on this because elite narratives prefer battles and commanders, but when they do mention disease and siege conditions, overcrowding and filth are never far behind. Burial changes too. In peacetime, there are rites, routes, and proper places. Under siege, those routines strain or break. If the dead cannot be taken outside the walls, they must be buried quickly inside available ground, stacked in emergency graves, or kept too long in places not meant for them. That is, several siege accounts hint at hurried disposal, neglected rites, or bodies left where fighting made retrieval impossible. Archaeology at conflict layers sometimes catches the result in compressed burials, trauma patterns, and human remains mixed with collapsed debris. Family-level decisions now matter more than proclamations. Which room is safest if artillery starts again? Who goes to the ration line? Who stays with the injured? Whether an older relative can still climb to an upper quarter if the lower streets are breached. Whether children are kept near a cistern, a shrine, a cellar, or a wall sector where water and food may be closer but missiles are worse. These are not dramatic choices in the literary sense. They are survival calculations repeated every day with less energy than the day before. Sickness arrives through the same openings as everything else. Crowding, foul water, spoiled food, stress, insects, bad air in packed rooms, and the simple collapse of ordinary routines. Ancient sources do not give neat diagnoses we can trust in every case, but fever, bowel illness, wound infection, and respiratory trouble are all likely in siege conditions. Thucydides' famous plague account comes from wartime crowding in Athens rather than a classic enclosed siege, yet it shows what dense populations under pressure could become. In besieged cities, once disease gets a hold, it competes directly with the enemy for bodies. The gap between households widens. A family in a sturdier house away from the wall, with access to stored water, better food, and fewer sleepers per room, has advantages that matter hourly. A family lodged in a crowded lower quarter near a threatened gate has almost none. Social rank does not stop stones or disease, but it changes the odds through space, diet, and access. Josephus' account of Jerusalem, read carefully, is full of such uneven survival. You also start noticing what can no longer be replaced. Clean bandages, good sandals, intact jars, dry fuel, a working knife, a healthy adult who can still carry a heavy load. Ancient siege narratives often focus on decisions, but cities usually fail through smaller shortages accumulating beneath them. The room with one wounded person can become the room with three. The house that shared water yesterday may lock its door tomorrow. The lane used for carrying the injured may be blocked by rubble after one strike. Evidence anchors this grim turn. Medical writings from the ancient world show what practitioners could attempt. Historians such as Josephus and Appian record the worsening condition of urban populations under pressure. Excavation at destroyed quarters reveals burn layers, mass trauma, and hurried use of domestic spaces in ways that fit emergency treatment and compressed living. Once survival reaches this scale, speeches from the wall matter less than the condition of the next bucket of water and the smell in the room after sunset. The city is still resisting, but now it is resisting house by house. If the city is still standing after the first shocks, it starts changing shape to survive. Streets are blocked on purpose. Houses near threatened sectors are stripped for beams and stone. Doors become shields, roofs become platforms, courtyards become workshops, and the night fills with labor that must stay quiet until the enemy gives you a reason to stop being quiet. Defenders adapt because they have no choice. A wall damaged yesterday gets a second skin by dawn. Rubble packed against it, timber braces, wicker screens, hides soaked against fire, fresh parapets built behind broken ones. If a tower is too exposed, a lower fallback line appears in the street behind it. Ancient sieges repeatedly show this pattern. Attackers break one edge, defenders improvise another. At Syracuse, walls and counterwalls multiplied until the battlefield looked like layered masonry arguments across the ground. At Jerusalem, every Roman gain forced new defensive positions deeper inside. The city survives by turning defeat at one point into delay at another. Night labor is the core of that delay. By day, missiles and engines punish visible movement. By night, crews haul stone, tamp earth, patch cracks, deepen ditches, clear rubble, and move water where morning fires may break out. Torches are shielded if possible. Orders are shortened to gestures and familiar calls. The tired work beside people wounded the previous day and below enemy watch fires that never fully go dark. Ancient historians notice this because it changed the rhythm of whole populations. Days become defense under fire. Nights become rebuilding under exhaustion. Countermeasures grow more specialized. If the enemy mines, defenders listen with bowls, shields, or ears pressed to the ground and dig countermine tunnels toward the sound. If ladders appear often, stones, hooks, poles, and concentrated missile teams are kept ready at the same sectors. If fire becomes the main threat, water stations multiply, roof access is controlled, and combustible clutter is cleared from lanes. If artillery has found the range, movement routes shift into covered passages, inner courts, or lower streets masked by existing walls. Ancient military treatises survive because such details mattered enough to write down. They were not ornaments. They were urban life preservers. Rations harden too. The easy waste disappears. Bread gets coarser again. Portions shrink in ways nobody can hide. Animals too useful to eat are preserved until they cannot be preserved any longer. Fuel is counted more tightly because uncooked grain or pulses save nothing if you cannot boil them. In some sieges, slaughtered animals, leather scrapings, and other poor substitutes enter the diet late. Sources vary, and some tales are exaggerated, but the downward direction is beyond dispute. Once regular meals are gone, work on the walls becomes harder to sustain. Discipline sharpens with scarcity. Guards at wells become stricter. Unauthorized movement near postern gates or weak sectors draws harsher punishment. Hoarding becomes a political issue as much as a practical one. Sorties, if attempted, are planned more carefully because losing able-bodied men for little gain hurts more than it did in the first week. This is also when factional tension can become lethal. Cities under siege often contain rival groups with different plans. Hold out for relief, negotiate, attempt breakout, or preserve the inner citadel at the expense of outer districts. Sources from Jerusalem in particular show how internal conflict can consume resources the enemy barely has to touch. Hidden routes may still be used, but with stricter purpose. A runner sent out now is not sent for rumor. He is sent for water access, relief timing, food, or terms. A small postern gate may serve a night raid to burn siege works, drag away a ram head, or kill sappers before they finish their trench. Such sorties could matter, and ancient accounts sometimes celebrate them, but their cost is plain. The men who go out must find their way back through a tighter ring than before, often carrying wounded and under pursuit in darkness. Archaeology helps here because it captures adaptation materially. Patched walls, secondary barriers inside gates, concentrations of missiles at repaired sectors, and domestic rooms abruptly repurposed for storage, shelter, or defense. Historians such as Thucydides and Josephus supply the sequence. The broken stone and burn marks supply the texture. All of this buys time, not comfort. The city becomes more skillful at being besieged and less capable of being ordinary. When the next attack comes, it will meet better preparations. It will also meet thinner bodies, shorter tempers, and fewer reserves behind the repaired wall. Hunger does not arrive as one dramatic scene. It spreads through the city like a stain, first obvious in the poorest quarters, then at the wells, then in the work details, then everywhere. You see it in thinner guards on the parapet, slower bucket lines, sharper disputes over scraps, and the sudden importance of anything that can still be boiled, chewed, traded, or hidden. By this stage, the gap between rich and poor is no longer a suspicion. It is visible. The houses with deeper storage, safer courtyards, private wells, or better access to ration points hold out longer. The crowded lanes near the wall do not. Refugees who entered late, laborers without reserves, and households that already sold useful goods in the first week now hit the worst edge of the siege. Ancient cities were unequal before the gates shut. A long siege hardens that inequality into survival rates. Josephus, for all his bias in drama, preserves the basic pattern at Jerusalem. Some still had food when others were already searching in desperation. The same social split appears in many other siege narratives if you read for conditions rather than speeches. Order weakens when official supply and private hoarding pull against each other. Searches begin. Hidden grain, oil, or salted food become worth violence. One account claims soldiers or guards broke into houses looking for stores. Another says neighbors informed against neighbors. Sources disagree on episodes and numbers, but not on the principle. A starved city turns inward. Trust thins with the rations. Work suffers next. Hauling stone on a half ration is slower. Night repair crews make more mistakes. Men on long watch drop where they stand or fail to hear what they would have heard 10 days earlier. Disease exploits this weakness. Minor bowel illness now empties a body fast. A wound that needs food and rest to heal receives neither. Even strong adults begin to look older in a siege before the calendar says much time has passed. This is why prolonged blockades were often smarter than repeated assaults. Hunger and exhaustion do work that ladders cannot. The street economy becomes uglier. Bad grain is mixed and sold at desperate prices. Water from fouled sources is passed off as safe. Fuel disappears into hidden trade. People strip abandoned buildings for anything burnable or edible. Leather, chaff, husks, and spoiled stores move from refuse into meals. Ancient accounts of extreme famine sometimes become sensational, so caution matters, but the lower steps toward that edge are well attested and fully believable. You do not need the most lurid tale to understand what hunger does. You only need to watch what vanishes from the market and what appears in the pot. Cracks also spread in command. Not every city under siege fragments, but many do. Some leaders push for continued resistance because relief may still come, or because surrender terms worsen with delay. Others argue for negotiation while the city still has leverage. Garrison troops may demand one plan, civilians another. Elite districts may think in terms of citadels and fallback positions. Outer neighborhoods may hear that as abandonment. At Carthage's end, resistance contracted inward through devastated space. At Jerusalem, factional violence made an already desperate situation worse. Siege pressure does not create every internal division, but it exposes all of them. The physical city reflects the strain. More doors stay barred. More quarters become no-go zones after dark. More people sleep close to their remaining food. Burials, if still possible with order, become faster and thinner. If not, the dead begin to mark the breakdown of routine as surely as hunger does. Archaeology at destruction layers often shows compressed occupation, scavenging, and emergency reuse of space before final collapse. You start to understand that survival chances now depend on three things more than anything else: access to water, access to food, and access to a sector that might remain defensible if the outer line fails. Bravery matters in an assault. In a long middle phase, position matters more. A family in a doomed quarter may be finished before the enemy steps over its threshold. Ancient evidence anchors this stage from several directions. Narrative historians describe ration collapse, faction fights, theft, and urban stress. Excavation shows burned, crowded, repeatedly patched neighborhoods. Military writers imply the rest by stressing stores, discipline, and secure water from the beginning. By now, the siege is no longer asking whether the city can endure in general. It is forcing each district to answer separately, and some districts are already answering no. Sooner or later, the city reaches the decision it kept postponing. Fight on, negotiate, attempt escape, risk a breakout, or wait for relief one more day. None of these choices is clean, and by the time they become urgent, all of them are worse than they would have been earlier. Fighting on makes sense only if the defenses still hold in more than one sector, water remains usable, and either relief is plausible or the attackers are taking losses they cannot sustain. Ancient commanders sometimes held out successfully under those conditions. Strong walls, secure springs, bad weather, divided attackers, or naval support could still change outcomes. Syracuse offers moments when control of sea and land approaches shifted enough to keep possibilities open. Some fortified places in the ancient world survived because the besiegers ran short first. But you cannot feed a city on possibility alone. If work crews are collapsing, if wells are contested, and if breaches are multiplying, continued resistance becomes arithmetic. Negotiation usually appears before outsiders expect it and later than starving people want it. Terms are everything. A city that still has walls, missiles, and some order can sometimes bargain for lives, ransoms, withdrawal, or at least restraint. A city already breached bargains from weakness. Ancient sieges repeatedly show that delay changes terms. Roman practice could be harsh, but many earlier and later commanders also calibrated mercy to resistance, politics, example, and available plunder. Sources often frame surrender in moral language. Strip that away, and you still see the material truth. Negotiate too soon, and some call it betrayal. Negotiate too late, and there may be nothing left to save. Escape is the private version of negotiation with fate. Small groups try ropes, drains, posterns, ravines, harbor craft, disguises, or stormy nights. Plataea gives the famous example of a breakout under weather and darkness, with ladders, measured steps, and men moving through gaps in enemy attention. It worked for some, not for all. Other sieges show the same hard rule. Escape chances fall as the ring tightens, but people keep trying because staying may be worse. If you attempt it, timing matters more than courage. Rain, moonlight, patrol patterns, terrain, and whether the city still has friends outside can decide everything. A breakout is different. That is organized force, not scattered flight. The city masses whoever can still fight, chooses one sector, and tries to punch through to reopen a road, seize water, or join a relief army. Breakouts can succeed when the besiegers are thin, surprised, or already under pressure from outside. They can also destroy the last useful garrison in a single morning. Once the able-bodied core goes down outside the wall, the city loses the muscle that kept fires contained and breaches repaired. Ancient accounts praise bold sorties, but the cost is always measurable in who does not return. Waiting for relief is the most dangerous choice because it disguises itself as patience. Sometimes relief really is close. Messengers get through. Allied banners appear on ridges. A fleet rounds the headland. Siege history contains genuine reversals, and a city that surrenders a day before help arrives becomes a warning for generations. Yet the record also contains far more places that waited past the point of recovery. That is why decision points in sieges are so brutal. The facts are partial, rumor is constant, and every extra day consumes stores no decision can restore. For ordinary people, these high choices become practical questions fast. If terms are discussed, can your district reach the gate in time? If escape is planned, who can physically make the descent, swim the harbor, climb the wall, or run loaded with water and food? If a breakout is ordered, do you remain in a quarter that may be stripped of defenders? If leaders fall back to an inner citadel, are outer neighborhoods abandoned by decision rather than defeat? Ancient narratives often treat strategy as the business of commanders. Siege survival shows it spreading downward into every household. Evidence for this stage comes from both literary and physical records. Thucydides preserves the Plataean breakout in operational detail. Josephus records debate, division, and failed chances at Jerusalem. Appian and Polybius describe negotiation, breach, and contracting defense in ways that show how quickly options narrow. Archaeology cannot record every council argument, but it does show fallback lines, burned gates, and final occupation clustered in inner strongholds. By the time this decision arrives, the city is no longer choosing between good and bad outcomes. It is choosing which form of danger will come first. The attackers know that too, and they press harder wherever hesitation shows. The siege tightens when even water starts to feel rationed by fear. The line at the well forms before dawn, guards count jars, and every trip across open ground carries the risk of a missile, a fight, or an empty cistern at the bottom. Once water and disease begin working together, the city's balance shifts fast. Food shortage weakens you. Bad water finishes the job. In ancient cities, secure water systems were everything. Deep wells, protected springs, cisterns filled before the siege, tunnels cut through rock, channels hidden from enemy view. If those systems held, a city might endure beyond what outsiders expected. If they failed, walls stopped mattering. Jerusalem's water engineering mattered because surface access could not be trusted. Many hilltop towns in the Levant depended on stored rainwater and carefully protected shafts for the same reason. A city can survive stale grain longer than it can survive uncertainty about the next bucket. Now disease presses where the enemy does not need to. Diarrheal illness, fever, wound infection, lice, flies, and breathing trouble in crowded rooms all rise under these conditions. Ancient texts are frustratingly vague by modern standards, but they are clear enough about pattern. Crowded wartime populations fall sick. The same bodies needed for wall repair and fire control are the bodies losing strength fastest. A city under siege cannot isolate illness well. Too many people share too little space, too little water, and too few clean materials. Exhaustion reshapes the defense. Men posted on towers lean rather than stand. Watch changes run late. Bucket lines fail to fill quickly enough when a roof catches. A call from one sector is answered slowly in another because the street is blocked, the runners are weak, or the reserve simply no longer exists. Attackers notice this. They do not always need a massive assault. Repeated pressure, probing attacks, mining sounds in the night, and artillery at bad hours can pull the last strength out of a defense already sagging from thirst and disease. The city also starts shrinking inward in practical terms even before a final breach. Districts near dry wells or shattered houses become less habitable. Safer sectors with dependable water draw more bodies, which makes them dirtier, louder, and more prone to sickness. The inner citadel or upper city begins to look like the only future that still counts. That concentration can help defense briefly. It also turns one quarter into a compressed trap if the outer line fails. Constant pressure alters movement. Routes once used to fetch water may now lie under enemy sight from a captured tower or newly raised mound. Streets that were merely crowded become impossible because rubble, corpses, broken carts, and scavengers choke them. In port cities, quays may be burned, blocked, or targeted by engines. In hill cities, steps become hazards because weak bodies carrying jars cannot move fast enough under alarm. Small changes in terrain matter more when everyone is tired. This is where later readers often underestimate siege survival. They imagine a grand last battle and miss the grinding middle in which endurance is physically stripped out of the population. Ancient authors give glimpses. Josephus on shrinking resources and internal strain, Appian on hard urban fighting and devastation, Thucydides on method, pressure, and narrow chances. The material record supports them with damaged water systems, burn layers, concentrations of projectiles, and emergency repairs in sectors that were clearly fought over again and again. If you are still alive here, your choices narrow around water, shelter, and timing. Do not sleep far from the most reliable source. Do not waste strength on unnecessary movement. Keep a route in mind toward the strongest remaining quarter. Protect containers as carefully as food. A broken jar can now matter more than a lost cloak. A fouled cistern can matter more than a damaged roof. The attackers feel the change too. They hear less shouting from the walls. Sorties grow rare. Fires are answered more slowly. Negotiators, deserters, or desperate escapees appear more often. This is why besiegers often intensified pressure at exactly this stage. The city is not yet dead, but it is losing the ability to correct mistakes. Once thirst, sickness, and exhaustion begin reinforcing each other, every new blow lands deeper. The siege no longer needs spectacle. It only needs one more hard week ahead. At the end of a long siege, the city is still inhabited but no longer functions like a city. Streets are there, walls are there, shrines, houses, workshops, and markets are still standing in part. Yet almost everything now serves one purpose only. Keep breathing through the next assault, the next ration, the next night without enough water. Normal distinctions collapse. A private courtyard is now a cook place, a shelter, a wound station, and a storage corner for cracked jars. A temple precinct may hold refugees, guards, grain, and the dying at the same time. A house nearest the wall may be abandoned because stones keep falling through the roof. Another farther back may hold 3 or 4 households because it has access to a cistern. In excavated destruction layers from the ancient Mediterranean, you can sometimes see this compression physically. Domestic rooms crowded with storage vessels, blocked doorways, hastily repaired partitions, and signs of burning followed by continued occupation before final ruin. Every choice now carries a severe cost. Use precious fuel to boil poor grain, or save the fuel for the next cold night and risk stomach sickness from bad cooking. Move the weak toward the inner stronghold, or keep them where they are because carrying them costs food, water, and labor the city cannot spare. Post your strongest remaining adults on the wall, or keep some back for firefighting and rubble clearance. Keep the last animals alive for hauling, or slaughter them because the city cannot feed them and men are already chewing through reserves. Negotiation may still be happening, but from a worse position than before. The attacker can see the signs: fewer missiles from the parapets, thinner watches, reduced return fire, smoke from accidental burns left unchecked too long, bodies handled with less order, more attempts to desert. Ancient commanders were not blind to urban distress. They watched for collapse the way hunters watch an injured animal's gait. A city that still had some strength could perhaps bargain. A city visibly at the end invited harsher terms, or a direct assault meant to finish matters quickly. The defense itself changes form. Great outer circuits matter less than knot points. The gate that still bars a main street, the tower controlling a stair, the wall line shielding the path to water, the inner citadel with enough height to dominate what remains. Carthage's final defense compressed into savage urban fighting through houses and streets. Jerusalem's struggle narrowed inward through successive sectors under Roman pressure. In many sieges, the last stage is not one wall against one army. It is a sequence of shrinking enclosures. Ordinary survival becomes location management. If your quarter is exposed, you need to know the nearest defensible move before the attack begins, not during it. Which lane still passes? Which stair is not blocked? Which roof has already burned? Which door opens onto a wall-backed court instead of a dead end? Which cistern still holds drinkable water? In an endgame city, ignorance kills quickly. The familiar route from better days may now lead straight into rubble or an enemy-held breach. This is also when violence inside the city can spike. Desperate theft becomes common. Guards become harsher because they must. Accusations of hoarding, desertion, or treachery rise. Ancient sources can be partisan and theatrical here, but there is no reason to doubt the general pattern. A city with too little food, too little water, and no easy escape is under pressure from both the enemy and its own breaking routines. Evidence anchors the picture. One account may exaggerate numbers, another may flatten the chaos, but when Josephus, Appian, and the excavated record all point toward compressed living, repeated fire, and shrinking defensive space, the broad picture is firm. Narrative historians describe contracting defense, famine, desperate negotiations, and final preparations. Archaeology adds collapsed roofing, projectile concentrations, burned storage, and hurried barriers built across inner streets. Military writers, read backward from their instructions, show what defenders feared most: fire, mines, rams, ladders, surprise, and thirst. At this point, survival is no longer about comfort, courage, or even long plans. It is about being in the right place with the right container, the right exit, and enough strength left to move when the sound from the wall changes again, hard. Now, then the breaking moment comes, and all the careful routines of survival are overtaken by speed. A breach opens. A gate burns through. A tower settles and spills stone into the ditch. Or the city chooses surrender because there is no district left able to hold another hard assault. However it happens, the end rarely arrives in the clean shape later art prefers. A breach is chaos with geometry. The opening may be narrow at first, choked with debris, bodies, broken timber, and loose stone. That does not make it safe. It makes it murderous. Attackers funnel in under cover from missiles above. Defenders counterattack downhill or from the flanks if they can. The first men through die fast, the next come over them. In some ancient assaults, the breach itself became a mound of rubble high enough to climb, turning a shattered wall into a ramp. Archaeology and narrative fit together well here. Collapsed masonry, dense projectile clusters, burn layers, then fighting moved deeper into the urban fabric. Sometimes the city does not wait for the breach to widen. It abandons the outer line and falls back to a citadel, upper quarter, or fortified precinct that can preserve a core for negotiation or one more round of defense. It can also trap everyone left outside the fallback line. Carthage's final fighting through streets and house lines shows how savage this contraction could become. Jerusalem too saw defense squeezed inward under repeated Roman success. Once the battle enters the streets, geography shifts from towers and gates to stairways, courtyards, alleys, rooftops, and room-to-room obstruction. Street fighting in an ancient city is brutal because movement is broken into fragments. A broad avenue can be swept by missiles. A narrow lane can be blocked by one collapsed wall or burning cart. Roofs offer advantage until they catch fire or crumble under weight. Defenders throw stones, tiles, javelins, and whatever else remains. Attackers answer with shields overhead, torches, axes, and concentrated force at choke points. Every doorway becomes a threshold between temporary safety and sudden killing. Ancient authors sometimes make these scenes dramatic, but the physical reality behind them is simple: stone, smoke, splinters, screams, and no room to maneuver. Surrender can be just as violent at the moment it begins. If terms were negotiated clearly and discipline holds, a city may open gates under guard and avoid immediate slaughter. If terms are confused, ignored, or offered too late, the opening of the gate becomes another breach. Commanders in antiquity varied enormously. Some spared to make a political point. Some enslaved, executed, or looted as example. Some lost control once troops entered a rich, angry, or long-resisted city. Sources are partisan and often inflated, but no serious reading of ancient siege history suggests that entry was safe by default. For ordinary survivors, the breaking moment is about seconds and routes. If the breach is near you, move away from the obvious line of advance. Stay out of squares that can become killing bowls. Avoid dead-end courtyards unless they have water and a second exit. Do not get trapped on a roof without a descent route. If surrender is announced, the danger is not over. Crowds rushing one gate can crush or expose themselves. If defenders fall back to an inner quarter, decide immediately whether you can reach it before the lanes clog with fugitives and fighters. One sector may hold for an hour longer. One commander may still bargain. One tower may keep archers shooting. But none of that restores the outer city once the line is broken and the flow of men through the opening becomes continuous. Ancient evidence gives several versions of this end. Thucydides records desperate breakout and narrow survival rather than a classic final sack at Plataea, showing how the breaking point can arrive before full urban storming. Josephus records Roman breaching, burning, and penetration of Jerusalem's defenses. Appian describes Carthage's appalling final urban fighting. Later historians, inscriptions, and archaeology preserve the aftermath in broken walls, burned districts, mass trauma, and emptied storage. What the breaking moment destroys first is choice. All the options debated in better days vanish under one fact: the enemy is in, or the gate is open, or the last defensible line has been reached. After that, survival depends less on policy than on where your feet are when the city gives way. The fighting may stop in one street and continue in the next, but for survivors the aftermath starts immediately. The city that held out for weeks or months turns into a map of searches, fires, prisoners, bodies, looting, and rationed mercy. Whether the attackers promised restraint or not, the first hours after entry are the most dangerous hours left. Streets fill with armed men who do not yet know every corner, and with civilians trying not to look like threats. That is a bad combination. Soldiers search houses for defenders, weapons, food, valuables, and hidden doors. Fires set during the assault keep spreading unless someone has enough order and water to stop them. The wounded lie where they fell until lanes are secure enough for collection. In places where resistance was bitter, revenge killings or uncontrolled plunder can run ahead of command. In places where discipline holds better, prisoners are separated faster and key buildings are secured first. Ancient accounts differ wildly in tone, but the material sequence is consistent. Entry, search, seizure, sorting. Prisoners matter at once because they become labor, ransom, slaves, hostages, political leverage, or dead depending on the city, the commander, and the level of resistance that came before. Men of fighting age are usually in the greatest immediate danger. Skilled artisans may be spared for use. Children and women may be taken, exchanged, dispersed, or enslaved. Elites may face negotiation, execution, or ransom depending on circumstance. No single rule covers antiquity, and sources are often self-serving, but it is clear that surviving the breach did not mean surviving the aftermath intact. Supplies are seized quickly. Grain stores, oil jars, weapons, animals, and any remaining water access come under armed control because the conqueror must feed troops and prevent renewed resistance. This is why a city's last hidden reserves sometimes surface only after it falls. Search parties force open sealed rooms, cellars, courtyards, roof spaces, and blocked doorways. Archaeology often reveals smashed storage vessels, abrupt abandonment of household goods, and hoards concealed in walls or under floors that were never recovered. Those finds are the silent record of people trying to preserve something through the sack and failing. The ruined city also reorganizes by force. Important gates are guarded. Towers are occupied. Strongpoints are cleared or burned. Streets may be opened by removing rubble to let troops and animals pass. Corpses are moved, stripped, buried, burned, or left, depending on heat, disease risk, labor, and discipline. Water points become military assets before they become humanitarian ones. The ordinary population, if not killed or driven off, is pushed into controllable zones. What was once a neighborhood becomes a holding area. Ancient narratives preserve several versions of this. Appian's account of Carthage emphasizes devastation, fire, and killing spread through urban space. Josephus describes slaughter, capture, burning, and the grim sorting of survivors after Jerusalem's fall. Other sieges end with stricter capitulation terms and less immediate destruction, especially when surrender comes before full storming, but even then the aftermath is harsh. A city that resisted is rarely left untouched. For you, survival in these hours means visibility without threat. Carrying a weapon can kill you. Running can kill you. Hiding in the wrong place can kill you when a room is torched or searched. Being in a group of military-aged men near a recent fight can kill you. Ancient evidence does not allow neat instructions for every case, but it supports one broad truth. Once the city falls, your best chance is often to avoid being mistaken for someone still fighting while also avoiding places about to be stripped, burned, or sealed. The city itself is finished as the place it was before the siege. Roofs are gone from some quarters. Walls are split. Wells are fouled or guarded. Granaries are empty or confiscated. Harbor districts, if any, may be smoking. Temples, houses, workshops, and streets are now part of conquest logistics. Later rebuilding may come. Some cities recover astonishingly. Others remain scarred for generations. But in the immediate aftermath, ruins are not symbols. They are hazards, cover, storehouses, prisons, and evidence of who controls the ground. When dawn comes after the sack, the silence is often broken only by orders, weeping, scavenging, and the sound of soldiers breaking into one more sealed room. The siege is over. Survival is not. Could you actually survive a city siege in ancient times? Yes, but not because you were brave, clever, or destined to make it. You survived if several hard conditions lined up in your favor. Secure water, enough stored food, a defensible district, useful labor capacity, and timing that did not place you at the wall, the gate, the fire, or the breach when those sectors failed. The evidence across ancient Mediterranean and Near Eastern sieges is consistent on that point. Cities with protected springs, deep wells, or filled cistern systems lasted longer and gave ordinary people better odds than cities forced to depend on exposed access or thin reserves. Jerusalem's waterworks mattered. Hilltop strongholds with reliable storage could outlast expectations. Port cities with open sea lanes could sometimes breathe longer. Once blockaded, their advantage narrowed. Food mattered just as much, but not simply in total quantity. Distribution, security, and social rank shaped outcomes. A city with stores hidden in a few strong houses was not the same as a city with disciplined public rationing and guarded access. Your odds improved if you entered the siege early enough to claim space near water and away from the weakest sector. They improved if you belonged to a household with containers, fuel, tools, and at least one healthy adult able to haul, repair, and stand watch. They improved if the city had an inner fallback line, because many ancient sieges were lost in layers, not all at once. They improved if surrender came before a full storm, and if the attacker had political reasons to spare rather than exterminate. They improved if your city was valuable enough to occupy and use, not just punish. Your odds worsened fast if you were poor, newly arrived, sick, injured, trapped in an outer quarter, or dependent on markets that emptied in the first days. They worsened if the city had factional conflict, because internal violence consumed food, labor, and trust. Jerusalem is the great warning here. Josephus is shaped by his own position and Roman audience, but even allowing for bias, his account preserves a catastrophic truth. A divided city under siege can spend itself before the enemy finishes the work. Your odds worsened if sanitation failed, because disease punishes the same bodies needed for defense. They worsened if the attacker built a complete ring and had time to wait. What usually doomed people was not a single dramatic failure. It was sequence. First the roads closed. Then markets emptied. Then rations shrank. Then sleep broke down. Then wounds and sickness lingered. Then one district took heavy damage. Then water grew harder to secure. Then movement through the city became dangerous or impossible. Then the decision to negotiate, escape, or fight on arrived too late. Ancient authors describe different sieges, but the mechanism repeats so often that it is unmistakable. Could an ordinary adult improve the odds? Yes, within limits. Stay near the safest, reliable water. Avoid living close to the obvious target gate if you can. Keep containers, cloth, fuel, and routes ready from the start, not after the first assault. Do useful work that keeps you attached to guarded distribution and defended sectors. Move early if a quarter starts failing. Moving late through panic streets is far worse. If surrender with terms is still possible, delay can be fatal. If escape is the only chance, the best moment is often before the ring becomes perfect, not after hunger has stripped away strength. Later writers shaped the memory of these sieges in powerful ways. Victors turned them into proofs of power. Defeated communities turned them into laments, warnings, or sacred memory. Historians highlighted commanders, speeches, omens, betrayals, and heroics because those elements endure in literature. Archaeology corrects that focus by showing what literature schemes over: shattered storage jars, patched walls, burned roofs, projectile clusters, damaged water systems, emergency burials, compressed living space. Put the texts and the ground together, and the ordinary truth becomes clear. Most survivors did not survive because they stood in a famous last charge. They survived because they had water one day longer, a stronger room, better timing, or the luck to be in the quarter that did not collapse first. So the honest answer is harsh. Stay with the channel for more history told this close to the ground. Could you survive? Possibly. Many did. Many more did not. Your chances depended less on personal resolve than on infrastructure, supply, class, health, discipline, and the exact hour when the city's defenses stopped absorbing pressure and started passing it directly into the streets. If this made the ancient siege feel close and physical rather than distant, that is the right way to remember it.